Now, Andrew works for the Australian government's Department of Finance. He's part of the web policy team that developed and is responsible for overseeing the implementation of the Web Accessibility National Transition Strategy to assist Australian governments in adopting WCAG 2.0. Andrew has a long history with web accessibility, and for many years he managed the web accessibility consulting team at Vision Australia, and more recently spent time with the World Wide Web Consortium in Europe on a project looking at the overlapping accessibility requirements of older people and people with disabilities. Now you can follow Andrew on Twitter at AMJA on Twitter. Now, Andrew, I have you set as a presenter, and you are now uploading your slides. Can you go ahead and give me a couple words here so I can verify your speech is working okay, your microphone's on, and stuff like that?
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, I'm good. Sorry, I hadn't enabled the microphone in Adobe Connect. I was talking away there and then realised the icon was blanked out. My apologies.
Yeah, it's hard to notice sometimes. You can, especially because that little slash there isn't all that great to notice.
Yes.
Now,
because I've nearly
you're
done.
uploading your slides, I guess.
So we should only be a few minutes, well, a few seconds now. It's at about 95%, my judgment progress bar.
Right, and there we go.
Okay, now
right,
just because
so
I haven't
go ahead and let you take it away there, Andrew. Thank you.
I did have a little experiment last evening. If I use the normal controls or to move through the slides, what do I need to do? There we go. I can do it. Thank you. There's some little buttons. Rightio. This is going to work just fine.
There you go.
Last time I did a webinar, we were using Skype to do the presentation and the audio video. Okay, so thank you for inviting me, and because we've had a lot of discussion with a number of countries around the world and a lot of interest in our approach to web accessibility, I thought I'd talk today about the Australian government's ongoing experience with trying to get a high level of uptake of WCAG 1, and now more recently obviously WCAG 2 across the Australian government. It's been an interesting journey, an ongoing journey, one that's not going to ever fail, but very recently, since WCAG 2 came out and Australia adopted it, we've had an incredible amount of progress. I don't think we'll ever be in a position to say where we can say we're there, but yes, it's been a very good journey. So I thought I'd just walk the community through that journey about how we've had the successes, where we haven't had some successes, and just point you more particularly run through the last 4 years of experience, the last 3.5 years of experience. I came back to Australia after 3 years in Europe, as Nathan said, working with the W3C, with the Web Accessibility Initiative, and the Australian government was just at the stage of implementing this 4-year strategy. So I jumped in and said, yes, I'd like to help with that, and hence I'm now based in Canberra rather than my usual Australian home of Melbourne. So a little bit of history, which I will walk through in a little more detail, but our Disability Discrimination Act is 1992, effectively pre-web for most of us. 1999, WCAG 1 came out, Australian government adopted it in 2000. We had a court case around web accessibility in 2000 with the Sydney Olympic Games. We signed up to the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities in 2007, 2008. We adopted WCAG 2 in 2009. and the National Disability Strategy, which has some impact on online service delivery, came out here in 2010, just before or about the same time as the Web Accessibility National Transition Strategy. And now we're at 2014, the end of the National Transition Strategy, and we're looking at where do we take Australia, or Australian government in particular, and we're finding that there's a lot of follow-on within the parts, at least, of the commercial private sector. So where do we go next? How do we take the next step? So as I said, our Disability Discrimination Act was 1992, pre-web. I think I started playing with the web in 1993 in the Department of Agriculture in Victoria at the time. So this was written in the early 90s. It covers provisions of the type that government provide as well as the private sector, and talks about equal access to information, government programs, access to voting places, facilities, information, a whole lot of other things that it sort of specifies, but it specifies them in terms of the physical built environment rather than the electronic environment. First time that whether the Disability Discrimination Act applied to the online environment, it had been discussed quite a bit since WCAG 1 came out, but it was definitively set then when Bruce Maguire took the Sydney Olympic Games Organising Committee to court. Initially he complained because he was having difficulty buying tickets online. I should fill you in. Bruce Maguire is a person who has been blind since birth, relies on a screen reader to have the screen read back to him. So he tried to buy some tickets, was having difficulty, made a complaint, was eventually able to get suitable tickets because he wanted to take his family. He lives in Sydney. It was nice to be able to participate in such a big event. So that didn't progress because he was satisfied in the end. But then, while the games were running, Australia's as parochial as the rest of you, and in our press and online, sort of the public media, television, radio, and so on, we tend to only report the events that we're participating in, or that we're participating well in. To be a little blunter about it, I suppose. And Bruce was interested in a wider range of sports that Australia wasn't participating in, and was having trouble accessing the website, and particularly the results tables. Complained, didn't get anywhere, and so it eventually did end up in court, and the finding was that SOCOG, the Sydney Olympic Games Organising Committee, had engaged in unlawful discrimination against Bruce, and presumably a number of other people, and damages were awarded. Now this is unusual in Australia. It's the only case because our Disability Discrimination Act is it's a complaints-based system, but the Australian Human Rights Commission rely on mediation rather than the court system. There's been a lot of complaints since, but they've all been settled satisfactorily to all parties concerned, and so nothing since 2000 has ended up in court. But it was very nice in some respects to have that early on in web accessibility in Australia, not that long after WCAG 1 came out, to demonstrate that the Disability Discrimination Act here very, very clearly applied to anything that the government and presumably the private sector were doing online. I've got some pointers there. I will make these slides available on SlideShare afterwards, so that people can find them, and Mike and Co can point to them. Okay, at about the same time, I'm not quite sure of the timing, I think it was shortly afterwards, the Australian government adopted WCAG 1, that was in 2000 as well. The Council of Australian Governments, which is the Commonwealth Government plus all the states, said yes, we'll take that on. The Australian Commonwealth Government Commonwealth agencies indicated that they would apply it to their online service deliveries. Most agencies at this stage were primarily still information-based, that they'd apply WCAG to within a year or two. Some agencies took this commitment seriously, others promptly or you know, either found it too difficult, had changes of staff, and it was applied in a very sort of loose way. So very, very few agencies got to the stage where they'd applied WCAG 1 seriously across all their offerings. At that stage, I was working with Vision Australia, and we were working with a number of agencies. You know, the obvious one who had an interest in this is the Department of Human Services, which looks after pensions, including disability pensions. So yes, we did a lot of work with them in particular, and a number of other agencies, but there was no program put in place. It was just a commitment that the agencies made, and so it was taken up in a haphazard manner. 2007, 2008, when the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities came along and applied very definitely to information online and ICT systems, including the internet, Australia signed up and ratified that agreement. So that gave a little bit more weight to what people were supposed to do. But I think, like most countries, we sort of pay attention to international conventions when it suits us and try and avoid them when it doesn't. But it was another piece of legislation that we'd signed up to internationally that helped to drive a little bit further Australia's adoption of web accessibility. The National Disability Strategy that came out in 2010 and is a 10-year strategy for the Australian government had one of its policy directions talked about ICT systems, information and communications technology systems, and said that they should be accessible, and the material being delivered, services being delivered via them, should be accessible, reliable and responsive to the needs of people with disabilities, as well as their families and carers. So at that point we had something very concrete to build on, and that's when we moved forward with the Web Accessibility National Transition Strategy. What we also did in 2009, I think it was the Council of Australian Governments formally adopted WCAG 2 as the basis or the standard by which web accessibility would be judged. When that was taken on board, the Secretary's ICT Governance Board at the Commonwealth Government said, that's all very well. COAG had agreed to level A. The Commonwealth Government then said, that's all very well, we should move up to level AA. And this time around we want some guidance, we want a plan, which was really nice because, as most of you probably appreciate, if there's not a plan in place, there's not some monitoring in place, there's no measurement in place, all good intentions and commitments tend to go by the way as other urgent or other important things take their place. So this time around, the Secretary's ICT Governance Board said, yes, okay, we want a plan, and that's when the National Transition Strategy, NTS as we call it here, was developed. So that came out in 2010 and is a 4-year plan. So AGIMO, which sits in Australian Government Information Management Office, which sits within the Department of Finance, was tasked to develop and oversee that plan, and most of the states and territories adopted the same approach. They said, yes, we'll follow along with this plan through from 2010 to 2014. However, some of them have applied modified timescales because they didn't get underway quite so soon. Western Australia, for instance, is working to a 2015-2016 timeframe, and it depends on the level of control in the different states. At the Commonwealth level, we have 2 types of agencies. We have those known as Financial Management Accountability Act agencies, which are all the key departments of state and the agencies that work with them. And then we have corporations, Government Corporations and Companies Act, which are a lot of the smaller agencies And so the National Transition Strategy was deemed to apply to all of the Departments of State and their immediate agencies, but not to the corporations and companies, though they were encouraged to adopt this same approach. Encouraged to sign up. 2 agencies did, the National Library, I think it was, and one other, and a number of other agencies, corporations are following the approach but haven't formally signed up, so they don't have to formally report under this. The NTS talks about the scope, talks about issues of retrospectivity to some extent. It's a phased approach. We said that there's going to be a preparation phase, a transition phase, and an implementation phase. Obviously, we're in the implementation phase at the moment. And looking at the scope, and I think this is partly why we haven't got quite as far as we might have liked, is that the scope maybe wasn't clearly understood by all the agencies who signed off and said, yes, the plan is fine, we can live with that, we can work with that. But the scope applies not just to the websites and web content, but also to all online services. And as many of you might appreciate, some of the great, some of the bigger service deliveries and the back ends that have to go with them, the redevelopment of the front ends is in many instances more than a 4-year time frame. And agencies weren't given any additional money to do this. They had to do it all within their existing budgets. And in the meantime, we've had tightening of government budgets because we went into deficit here during the global financial crisis, and since then we've had some significant tightening of government budgets, which applies to the agencies trying to do this type of work and all their other work within the same declining budgets. There are questions about what is it, and we defined for the purpose of this website isn't just finance.gov.au, but it might be agamo.finance.gov.au, which, even though it would appear to be under finance and is under finance, might have a different look and feel, a different audience, because we're targeting government ICT audience, whereas finance on the whole is targeting the government accountants and financial management controllers and procurement officers and those types of people. So if a subsite, whether it be a subdomain or a subdirectory of a third level URL, has a different audience and different look and feel and totally different purpose, then we deem that to be a separate website and should be reported on. We also included intranets, which has been an interesting exercise. And as I said, quite clear that all online service delivery, so within an intranet, the HR system fell under that because most HR systems are delivered via intranet via a browser. It included documents as well. A lot of agencies were publishing documents online that weren't in HTML, and we made it clear that all their online publishing included, it was counted. What we did was, as part of that, was ask them about when they're going to upgrade and gave them the option of archiving or decommissioning material. And we prepared a diagram, which I can't see there. I thought I had that in the slide. Okay, this is sort of a picture of what was going on within the phase one for preparation. Included agency website stocktake, accessibility conformance checks, infrastructure assessments, and so on. That was basically to look at the period of first part of 2010 or all of 2010. The transition phase, where they're meant to have gone through a staff skills, a procurement review, because they might, and an infrastructure upgrade was 2011 through the first part of 2011, and then they're meant to be in this implementation phase. As you can appreciate, things like education and training are ongoing, procurement reviews are ongoing, because a lot of larger systems were locked into 2-year, 5-year, whatever contracts. So some of those contracts had to go through procurement reviews, but couldn't go through them until they were up for their review. So the preparation, transition and implementation, although that was a phased approach, we find that agencies are going back and revisiting these things as they go through. So the preparation phase, they were supposed to undertake a stock take, and at the end of 2010 we undertook a survey to find out where they were at. They were supposed to have checked all their sites, websites and applications, assessed their infrastructure, done a capability assessment and looked at a risk assessment. Oh, sorry, I do have that flow chart there. So we gave them some instruction about how they might consider archiving. Is the content still important or popular? If it wasn't, we suggested that they either decommission it completely if it was going to be replaced or was quite out of date, or they archive it if it was still of the public interest. Australian Government Information Management Office has been archiving stuff for nearly a decade now, because it does give a history of the development of ICT programs within the government, and a lot of agencies have started to follow that. We also said that if it was still important or popular and they're going to leave it online, they could, if it was WCAG 1, say, okay, here's our line in the stand. If it's WCAG 1, they could leave it at WCAG 1 conforming, with a disclaimer that this is older material left there in the public interest, and at that stage not do any more with it, otherwise they needed to upgrade their new material. We also included in there a requirement that anything new, any new service delivery, anything, any new websites, any new web pages were required to be released at WCAG 2 conformance. Part of the process put some timelines in. Just going back to the chart, we said that by the end of 2012, everything should be WCAG 1 conformant WCAG 2 at level A, and by the end of this year, everything should be WCAG 2 level AA. The transition phase covered training and education. We provided some of that education. The private not-for-profit sector provided some of it. The agencies themselves did a lot of internal training as well, and that's ongoing. Most agencies undertook procurement reviews and assessed their where they'd got to with or what they needed to, where they got to and how they were tracking with their infrastructure and capability upgrades. So particularly, staff, most of the staff were responsible for content preparation. The early indications were that there was a very, very low level of awareness of what was required from a writing perspective, even in terms of preparing stuff in Word, which was then going to be moved into HTML. So a lot of gaps in the knowledge of staff had to be filled there. With the procurement review, basically they had to look and see whether what their internal procurement processes were, and were they sourcing stuff that was fit for purpose, both in goods and services that they were providing, or if they were outsourcing the production of things like annual reports. Okay, there's a lag between the slides showing and the text on the slides coming up. My apologies for that. I was just wondering why I had a whole series of blank slides in there. So phase 3, the implementation phase, many agencies were fortunate because this whole NTS program coincided with their refresh. Other agencies have had to sort of say, okay, how can we work backwards? But we figured that for most websites would go through a refresh sometime within a 4-year period. Conformance testing, we've left that up to the agencies to do it themselves. We haven't stepped in and done any spot checking. We've undertaken a survey back at the start of the whole process. We undertook another one at the end of early 2013 to see how progress was tracking. We've got another one coming up shortly to keep them on track this year, and we'll have a big one at the start of next year. So there's been those two surveys that are indicated on that chart, one at the end of 2012 and one to the end of 2014 is where we got to. So the two reports that came out from that are both available online. There's links on those slides, but where did we get to between 2010 and 2012? We found that there were nearly 1,400 websites still active and still included for accessibility assessment. A lot of those were internal websites. We also found that a number of agencies, I think we had initially something like 1,600, so there's been a lot of condensation, amalgamation of websites within agencies, which makes it easier for them to manage their web real estate as well. But whenever a new campaign or a new program was going out, then they were releasing a new website to go with that, rather than saying this is just part of what we do and should be part of a centralised website. This time around, we asked them about mobile suitable, and a bit over a quarter of the agencies indicated that their websites adapted or responded to mobile devices. So we've had a very rapid uptake of mobile usage in Australia. Something like over 50% of people are now browsing the web, browsing government websites from the latest information we've had using mobile devices. Again, that was an agency assessment. A few people have come back to us and said, hey, look, these agencies are saying their sites are mobile suitable, it doesn't work on my phone. But we're asking the questions, and we've got a separate program pushing them along the mobile route in terms of making all the services available through mobile, and also adopting the BYOD, bring your own device. A bit over 25% of websites were claimed to be WCAG 2 single A, up from 5% back at 2010. So that was a good move. The disappointing move was that we weren't up at 3/4 of the websites or more. The issue for our measurement is that you either conform with WCAG or you don't conform with WCAG. And our survey didn't allow for that. At the moment, we're trying to ascertain how we might say, okay, so how far have you got when we get to the end of this year? Because we want to be able to report a much more progress than that. But this was the bottom line, the black and white, if you like, view of where we got to at the end of 2012. We also found that there were about 1,100 web applications in use in the large and medium agencies, primarily because they're the agencies that have the service delivery, but they also include internal things like HR systems, leave systems, finance systems, and so on, all the stuff that you need to run an organisation. Agencies also told us that about 16% of their web applications conformed with WCAG 2 at any level. So that was quite pleasing, considering the long life cycle for online service delivery, and the back ends and front ends and locked-in contracts and so on there. One of the really interesting things that we found is that agencies reported a drop from about 28,000 staff to 22,000 staff involved in web activity, and the survey also indicated, as it did in 2010, that most of those staff were working on the provision of content rather than development of the website, or the direct publishing process if they weren't using a distributed publishing system, or development of the interface for the applications, like applying for a passport online or a pension. The other really interesting thing is in 2010 there were no staff in any of the agencies reported as being dedicated to web accessibility. This time around, there's 110 approximately Financial Management Accountability Act agencies that were reporting to us, and across those agencies, 63 staff whose primary role was web accessibility. So that was a really big change, and told us that also that the agencies were taking web accessibility seriously. We'd like to see more, of course, but that's still a significant improvement. Skills. Sorry, something's just gone wrong there. Lost the screen. We're back. Fine. Good. Webinars are always interesting things when you're relying on the technology. So nearly 3,000 staff were reported as having some sort of training in web accessibility in one form or another within the agencies. The sessions that we'd run, around 1,500 staff had either attended in person or, to the best of our ability to measure, had accessed. The next number there, the nearly 10,000 is people who had accessed the material that we put online that was training material. So there was a big skills improvement program going on, which obviously is needed to underpin this. The other thing that we've encouraged agencies to do is prepare action plans to position the agency both to achieve accessibility, but to work out what's going to happen in the meantime. Our Human Rights Commission says that if agencies have public action plans, or any organisation has a public action plan about how they're working both in the physical environment and in the online environment to treat and manage service delivery for people with disabilities, then that will stand them in good stead if somebody makes a complaint, because it's been publicly acknowledged that they've got some problems and publicly acknowledged about what they're going to do about it. So we've been encouraging agencies to prepare these as part of their broader disability action plans and lodge them with the Human Rights Commission. Capture and endeavour their intent, document everything they've done, identify where the risks are, prioritise where they're going to work, minimise their exposure, obviously. So if you've got things online that are being looked at by tens of thousands of people versus hundreds of people, you should be looking at those larger, more important areas, and going through a continuous update of these action plans every 6 months, every 12 months, as you're making progress. So that these should be living documents, not something that's been prepared, lodged with the Human Rights Commission, and then forgotten about. Whose types of things we're telling to put in there, who's responsible, what's been done to date, where does the inaccessibility still occur, why is it a problem, when will it be achieved, and what are they doing about it, what are their priorities and what are their plans to move ahead in that area. So where are we going? That's where we've got to at the moment. We've just had a change of government. They just brought down their first budget, which is not good news for a lot of agencies. The previous government has been blamed for a very bad budget position, so the new government is doing the usual new government thing and saying, okay, we've got to do better. We're going to cut government spending in all sorts of different areas. I'll let you read about that and follow the news independently. But what we're saying, the coalition had a policy for e-government and digital economy, which is becoming government policy before they came into office. Basically, they're taking an approach of digital first, digital by default, and so we're saying quite clearly that if that's the approach that we're going to be taking, which is the direction that we were going down anyway, then accessibility is absolutely required if we're expecting people to deal with government online rather than in an office over the phone by paper. And effectively, accessibility needs to become business as usual, which is the direction that we were going as the NTS was winding up at the end of this year anyway, but the new government's policy allows us to say this even more strongly. They're instructing us to follow approximately the UK approach that I know New Zealand and some other countries have picked up and run with, which is a shrinkage of the web real estate and a requirement that agencies design their services digitally first and then look at how they're going to manage for those people who can't, for one reason or another, go online to interact with government. So again, that drives us to saying accessibility needs to be part of business as usual. The other thing that I alluded to early on was that WCAG 2 and the NTS was set up as agencies must meet WCAG 2 single A, and by the end of this year WCAG 2 double A, and we didn't have any allowance for those agencies who had done all the work but had failed because they still had 10 videos that didn't have captions and transcripts and possibly audio description to go with it. So their website obviously fails and they get a black mark, and people start asking ministers and senior executives start asking questions, even though they might have conformed everywhere else. So, what about the maybe, the partly, the mostly? We did try and tease out in our last survey how agencies were progressing. We got some indication about areas where that were how many agencies had indicated that certain things were a problem to them or not a problem to them, but we didn't do enough pre-testing of our survey to be able to get any definitive material back from that in terms of how agencies were progressing. So this time around, we're actually considering taking on the Canadian approach, where they ask their agencies about the websites against each success criteria, and in floating that idea recently with the people responsible for the NTS within agencies, they're saying, yes, actually that might be easier for us to report against than just a black and white, because it does allow us to demonstrate what progress we've made. So the bottom line here is that what we're really encouraging agencies to do, even though it's a harder thing to sell to senior management, is that accessibility is a journey, that WCAG 2 is the seal that we'd like to be able to put on all the websites, but websites aren't like publications where if you get the accessibility right within a printed publication, in terms of the contrast, the font, the readability, the explanation of the diagrams and graphs that might be in it and so on, and then it's printed and that's it. It sits on the shelf and it's accessible to, nobody ever makes a change to it, and it's accessible to, within your ability. The websites are continually changing. They're continually publishing new material. They're continually, refining the information architecture. The service delivery is being refined as they're trying to put more and more of the services online and so on. So having the black and white requirement that we've got there at the end of this year is something that we're trying to sell. It's not the way to go. It's going to be an ongoing journey. It's expected to be part of business as usual. And you've got to consider accessibility with everything you do. We've had some success. I mean, I know most of you online will say, okay, we've got to start with accessibility right back at the design phase. When we're thinking about it, we've got to be thinking about who our end users are, and they need to include people with usabilities. With the UK approach, where websites and service delivery go through a discovery phase, an alpha, beta, go live phase, we're looking at how we can build that accessibility and get it emphasised even more back at the discovery and the consideration of the end user, and then hopefully it'll get built into the alphas and betas as we go through. So there's a couple of phases that allow it to get built in there. So our movement ahead at the moment is how we are going to adopt the UK government digital service approach, and how we can weave accessibility in right back to a much earlier stage than many agencies have considered it at the moment, where it still is, unfortunately, in some respects. We built this, we've got to release it next week, or the Minister says we've got to put this website out over the weekend. We'll think about accessibility after we've done the initial work. But as I said, we're making a lot of progress, and we think that we're going to continue to make a lot of progress, but it's a journey that will probably not have an endpoint until such time as accessibility just becomes business as usual, and people just do it by default. Just as part of how we're getting it into business as usual, the parallel program that's looking at mobile devices is helping us with this. The people developing mobile applications and mobile service delivery seem to be more attuned than the traditional publishers and web developers, so they're seeing it as more of a challenge. And the other aspect of that is that situational impairments become much more understood as senior management try and do things on their smartphones, their tablets, and so on, and say, hey, look, this isn't working. Why isn't it working for me in this situation? Oh, it's because we hadn't done, not that anybody would own up, but there's more pressure coming to drive things from that situational impairment point of view, which is obviously good for accessibility. Okay, I'll stop talking there. I'll leave a bit of time for some questions if we've got some, and some time for handover to the next presenter. And hopefully I'll be able to sit in for some of the presentations later in the day. Thanks, Nathan.
All right. Yeah, Andrew, man, it looks like you have a bunch of questions here. I'll get my microphone a little bit closer. So the first one is actually from Mike Paciello, and his question was, Andrew, did you explain the enforcement process of NTS, and how is conformance measured?
Sorry, you broke up partway through that. Could you just repeat that?
Sorry. Yeah, he said, did you explain the enforcement process of NTS, and how is conformance measured?
Conformance is up to the agencies to measure themselves. Most of them are doing a mixture of getting an external assessor in, as well as doing it in-house themselves. So not every, there's limited pool of external people who can do this sort of work in Australia, but it's interesting how we've driven that with the NTS from what I was aware of 2 or 3 organisations that could help government and the private sector with that work 5 or 6 years ago, to probably 2 handfuls now, and probably more. The other thing that's happening is that a lot of the usability folk are picking up the accessibility and helping government agencies in the private sector with it. So, but we left the assessment up to the individual agencies to do that assessment themselves. Some of them have built the skill in-house. Others are contracting in that skill. And many of them seem to be doing it as a mixture of in-house with some external support. The other one of the things that we did ask that I didn't talk about is what sort of tools are agencies are using. 38 of the 105 agencies reported that they were using a site-wide automated testing tool, and another 15 back at the end of 2010, another 15. So we're getting close to a half of all agencies that report to us indicate that they were or intended to at that point use a site-wide automated tool as part of their testing. 3/4 of the agencies were using manual testing. About 2/3 of them were using document testing tools, so to look at Word and PDF type documents before they were published. But as I said, about half, well, I've actually got the number here in the progress report, that half the agencies were using outsourced service providers to assist them with their assessments.
Thank you. Now, let me go through here. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions? Oh. So Mike also added, is there any notion of a penalty for non-conformance?
Sorry, can you just repeat that, Nathan?
Is there any notion of a penalty for those who are non-conformant?
Not directly. It is a public report, so we had felt that there would be some competition between agencies, and I think there has been to some extent. It also opens up to the public where agencies are at, and so if individuals are having difficulty with a particular agency, they can refer to the report, and the agency has reported a low level of conformance, a low level of staff training, and so on. That might help them say, yes, look, I will lodge a complaint. In fact, we've actually found that some of the agencies that had complaints lodged prior to the NTS are those agencies that have taken this more seriously. So by having a more transparent process, we'd hope that would also drive that. Yes, we are the Department of Finance, but agencies, the way agencies ICT is run in Australia, and most of their spending is once they put forward and got their budget, by and large their ICT spend is up to the agency. Finance isn't going to say, no, your budget is cancelled this year because you didn't meet this requirement or another requirement. And there's a whole range of ICT requirements on agencies, not just accessibility. They've also got to obviously comply with privacy, a variety of security things. They're all meant to be moving to IPv6 at the end of last year, and most of them have, but not all of them. There were reporting regimes on a whole range of ICT requirements. But by having a more open and transparent process, we felt that, and having this measurement put in place, we felt that was going to drive accessibility, and the observation is that it has driven a lot more accessibility than the previous process of, yes, we'll do this, but there was no reporting requirement.
Okay, I got you. Now, does anybody else have any other questions?
So Jason just indicated in the chat window one incentive to tie conformance to executive management's performance rating. And yes, and I think that is the case in some agencies, and that may be partly why some agencies have done better than other agencies, because there has been somebody who has been nominated as being, this is my deliverable, and if it's not, it comes back to bite me. I know a number of agencies, including finance, have diversity champions at the very senior executive level, and in those agencies they've helped to drive the process as well.
Excellent. All right. Excellent. So with 8 minutes left, we're going to shift focus over to Graham Coleman, and so in 8 minutes we'll have Graham Coleman up with the introduction to the Web Accessibility Toolbar. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thanks for the opportunity.